There is a lot of depth into making builds on the Division 2, and I think it's safe to say that every single player wants to try and get as much DPS or damage as possible, because the aim of the game is to take down enemies, get kills, and the quicker you can do it, the better. Some players might want survivability builds and things like that, and diversity for skill builds, but there is builds all over YouTube. Like everywhere you look, there is builds for ARs, LMGs, high DPS, 2.2 mil, 1.2 mil. There are tons of them. I've even done some myself. So in this video, what I want to do is go through 10 factors that go into builds in order to maximize your weapon damage so that you can play the game, play through the content, and take out enemies as quick as possible. The very first thing we're going to start with is learning to control your recoil. As we leave the White House, there is a little area around here, and on this wall, you can fire at it, you can see your bullets. It's the closest place to the White House I found where you can do this. And if you just fire, if you're on console, you don't move your analog stick, you'll see the recoil pattern for the gun you're using. And the more you try and counter the recoil, the better you'll get, to the point where you'll eventually master the gun you're using. I currently have an M60 on this build, so if we aim at the wall, and we start firing, not touching the analog stick, when we get towards the end of the magazine, it starts stabilizing itself. But you can see from the very start, it goes up and to the right a tiny bit, then it starts going all over the place about halfway through the mag. The recoil pattern is going to be completely different with every single gun you use in this game. So just go to a random area, you can always restock and get ammo back. Shoot an entire mag without touching your analog stick or moving your mouse, so that you can see the recoil pattern, you can learn to counter it, and you can steady your gun better. As we're going back to the White House, I want to go through the highest base damage you can get on any weapon in the game. And we'll start off with the ARs. The reason I'm doing the highest base damage is because it maximizes your damage. And as long as you can learn the recoil, because some of the weapons recoil a lot more than others. So as long as you learn the recoil patterns, you can control the recoil. The weapon you're using doesn't matter. Fire rate and stuff like that comes into it, but this is purely for the highest damage possible. This is maximum damage. And starting off with the ARs, you do have the Eagle Bearer, but I'm not going to go with that because it's exclusive to the raid. So there's only a select amount of players that have the gun. But the maximum base damage you can get on the Eagle Bearer is 17,100. Your next best option is the AKM. That can roll up to 16,300 as a base damage stat. Then for LMGs, you have the M60. That's got a little over 20,000 maximum base damage. And when you compare it to other guns like the M249B, easier to control the recoil, but switching out from my M249B to an M60 has given me roughly an extra 7,000 base damage on the weapon. And if you're putting an entire mag into an enemy, 100 rounds without like large pouches and things like that, that's an extra 700,000 damage without any other boosts. For the pistols, you have Kendra's Liberty, and all of these guns are based on a 500 gear score, so it's going to be lower stats if you're not in World Tier 5, like at the maximum, the highest end of World Tier 5. But the Kendra's Liberty can get a maximum base damage of 63,700. For shotguns, you have the Sweet Dreams, 166,100. For marksman rifles / snipers, the Nemesis can roll with a base damage of 315,000. For SMGs, it's the T821, that comes with 18,600. And for the standard semi-auto rifles, the 1886 can roll with 71,600 damage. What I would recommend doing to see the base damage of your gun is try and make a build, like save it in your loadouts to where you don't have many weapon damage boosts at all, because that will show you pretty much what the base damage stat is, and you can work from there to optimize it. It's going to help you determine which ones are better to pick up. Then we have the damage talents you get on weapons, and if we go into my inventory, when I say a damage talent, I mean things like Unhinged. With that, we lose 25% weapon handling, but we receive 20% extra weapon damage. That's the reason my M60 is at 35.4k. My M249B was like 27,000 something, if I remember correctly. And I've now seen that it's possible. Some players have managed to get their base damage stat on their M60 up to just over 40,000. So they've initially doubled the damage output of their base stat You also get damage talents like Ranger that increase your damage based on distance away from enemies, and there's Optimist, which increases your damage based on the amount of ammo missing from your mag. Then we have the weapon mods. If we go into my M60, you have your scopes and your sights. They can increase accuracy, but you can get headshot damage, you can get damage to elites, critical hit chance, and all of those are essentially going to boost your weapon damage. Then we have brand sets. They will add bonus damage to your weapons, and I believe there is a brand set for every single weapon type in the game. Looking at my chest, Petrov Defense Group gives me 10% LMG damage just for having one piece from the brand equipped on my build. Then we have the gear attributes. If you look at my chest here, it's got 15% weapon damage. You can also get things like critical hit chance, critical hit damage, headshot damage. I've got a piece of gear in my stash that gives me 20% extra headshot damage. And just because of the aiming difference between console and PC, if you're a console player, I wouldn't focus too much on headshot damage unless you can fully control the recoil with the gun you're using. Then we have the gear talents. I've got Wicked on my gloves, which gives me 10% weapon damage to status affected enemies. You can get boosted headshot damage, you can get critical stuff. There's a talent called Devastating, which boosts your weapon damage as well. Then we have gear mods. Taking a look at my holster, I have an offensive mod, which boosts my weapon damage by 1.5%. I also get some damage to armor. If you farm generic mods, you can get like up to 6% weapon damage for the type of weapon you're using. I think it caps at 6%, I'm not 100% sure. But generic mods can go on a lot of gear types, so you can get like 30 or 40% bonus damage for your weapon just in the mods alone. Then we have the specializations in the game. Taking a look at Sharpshooter, you get increased rifle damage. And then going into Survivalist, you can get Shotgun and Assault Rifle. Demolitionist, you will see damage boosts for SMGs and also for LMGs. A lot of players use Sharpshooter because there is weapon handling and increased headshot damage, but specializations will play a part in increasing your weapons damage. And then last but not least, we have the exotic weapons. You have the Nemesis, which can boost your headshot damage by 25%, but one thing to bear in mind with that is you can't be using a sight, it has to be an actual scope. The ACOG scope the 4 times will work. It lets you look over your shoulder, you don't actually have to scope in, and it will award you with a 25% headshot damage from the Nemesis. But I'm running the Merciless because I'm trying to steer clear of headshot damage. I still have a fair amount on my builds, I'm just not focusing on it so much because it's harder to go for headshots on console. So I'm currently using the Merciless because each shot has a 5% chance to deal 20% extra damage as explosive damage. And if we quickly take a look at my stats, I've got a lot of hard hitting. I've got a little over 20% critical hit chance with 32% extra damage from that, 65% headshot damage, and then I've got 44.5% all weapons damage, 37% LMG, and I've got 2% armor damage and 80% damage to elites. But one thing to remember is there is pretty much around a 0.005% chance or something stupid like that. It's a very, very low chance that you're going to get a god tier roll on a piece of gear or a very high end base damage stat on a gun you find. So when you're building for damage, it's going to take time. Don't expect to make the perfect min-maxed build focused purely on damage like a glass cannon build overnight. It's going to take you a while. And I was working on this build, like as an example, I was working on this build for a little over a week or something for the raid, and I can still squeeze like another 5,000 damage out of this M60. But because of the low chance, it's going to take a very long time for me to push extra damage into this build. But that was 10 factors into getting the maximum damage out of your gun possible. There might be a few things I've missed, but as far as I can think of, I have covered everything you should need to know. What I'm going to do is leave a link to a spreadsheet in the description that will tell you everything you need to know about building all the gear talents, the maximum stats you can get on your gear, your guns. Absolutely everything is on that spreadsheet. So if you're looking to get the best build possible, check that out, links in the description. That should hopefully help you out. And let me know your thoughts and stuff in the comments, what sort of damage numbers you see on your guns. That's the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.